Hello, you're listening to the IoT Weekly Podcast. Hello, and welcome to episode number 26 of the IoT Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Gearforge Software. My name is Matthew, and I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Cliff. And today, we've got a special guest host joining us from Europe, Florian. Hello, Florian. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yes, welcome, Florian. So happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and this was one of the fantastic connections that we made through the podcast, in fact. So appreciate you listening and coming to join us.
Yeah, kind of a Twitter coincidence, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's right. So, what have you been up to, Cliff?
Well, I think I had mentioned last week that I was going to be doing a ton of yard work. Well, we ended up moving about a ton of rock using a wheelbarrow and a shovel. And if I never see rock and shovel again in my life, I will be happy. It is just awful. And then on top of that, I don't know if I mentioned this, I live on the Mississippi River, so it's a pretty big river. You can fish and everything else in it. So we decided to get a boat and a motor. And I have no clue how to operate a boat motor. So it'll be quite interesting this weekend trying to figure that out.
That sounds interesting.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
How are you trying to figure it out?
Yeah. I'm really worried because like the Mississippi River, it's not like a lake. It's always moving.
Yeah,
So
right.
I could be like a mile downriver before I figure
Until
this
it
thing
works.
out. Yeah, exactly. I don't even know how to start the motor. Let's just go fundamentals. Or how to, I had to figure out how to, you have to mix oil and gas in a can ahead of time. Didn't know that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sure
Just
enough.
crossing borders involuntarily.
There's little risk of that here. He'd have to float. He'd have to float down to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes. Yeah. There's a couple dams I'd get stuck at. So worst case,
okay.
I'm calling a friend of ours to come pick me up.
You get stuck somewhere in the middle of the country.
Oh gosh, yes. Florian, how about you? What you been up to?
Well, I actually did some yard work as well. Not as much rock, mostly dirt. And it's not as hot as with you guys, but still not as much fun. And I think we'll have to get some larger machines to keep on going. So there's a pause on that, luckily. But other than that, obviously, I had to pull a couple of updates on my own website regarding GDPR and written a couple of blog posts. Not all of them are finished. Some also regarding GDPR, Google AI regarding the recent updates Google announced at I/O and so forth. So whenever I do get upstairs to my keyboard, I try to hit a couple of those out. And other than that, I'm mostly outside with a shovel.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Florian, what's your website address, if you don't mind me asking?
That's basically just my name, Florian, and then FUEHREN.com.
Perfect.
Not as easy for the American ear, but
No worries. Matthew, how about you?
Well, my dachshund has had a bad back. They're prone to this kind of thing, but last week he pretty much lost the use of his back legs all of a sudden, and so we had a bunch of vet appointments and appointments at the university, the vet over at the university, which was actually pretty interesting. But it's all been a lot. There's been a lot of running around, and he needs some extra care. So that's been my pretty much my extra activity this week has been taking care of a tiny old dog.
Don't you have a dog stroller too?
We do, yeah. So when so we need to keep him from moving around so he can kind of rest his back and heal, and that has been working pretty well. Like, he's recovered a lot of motion, but it's very important that he doesn't jump or anything like that. So when, let's say, I'm in the kitchen getting a little bit of food, we need to keep him from like running around. And so, so I put him in a dog stroller.
Do you have a lot of stairs?
We have 3 floors. Yes. So we do have
Oh.
plenty of stairs, but also just even, ordinary walking around really shouldn't be doing a lot of that right now.
Okay.
Should probably rest 4 to 6 weeks. And there was discussion of surgery, but we kind of opted not to do that at this point because of he still has, he seems to be recovering pretty well. And
Okay.
so, but even so, the stairs are a definite no-no, but even just furniture or, moving around and just wrenching his back would be bad. So we're trying to keep him still. And so he sits in a stroller a lot of the time in the kitchen, just watching us.
Not really enjoying it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you guys, it's here. It's finally here. It is
Summer?
Well, I was thinking of GDPR. It is happy GDPR Day to you.
Yes. Happy GDPR Day. Wow.
And in honor of this really groundbreaking legislation that has gone into effect in the EU, we are going to dedicate our show to discussing this, and specifically discussing some commentary about the effects that it's having, intended and unintended, and some of the interesting news that hit. So it's been a very busy news morning for those of you watching the tech news.
Yes.
As Twitter just kind of blew up today as GDPR hit. So that will be, I think, a really fun discussion.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Totally.
So Cliff, do we have any feedback this week?
Well, we did actually have Adele, hit us up for an IoT button. I'm just waiting for him to give us a shout. I gave him an email address to hit us up on. So if you want to shoot me a message at podcast@gearforgesoftware.com with your address, I will send you a second generation Amazon button. And just as last week I mentioned, if you're listening and you'd like one of these second generation buttons, I've given up on a contest and I'm just giving these things away for free. Hit me up on Twitter or hit us up at Gearforge IoT, and I will personally send you a button.
So there is one condition, isn't there, that you didn't mention?
Yes.
They are only available
in the United States.
Outside the EU.
Yes, sorry. I would love to blame this on GPDR,
Yes.
but it's really the shipping is outrageous to send it to Europe. It's crazy.
I know.
It's more than the button. I mean,
it is more than the button. It's kind of wild. So if you want to pay for the shipping, I will ship it to you. That's okay.
It probably won't work anyways.
It will track you.
I'll probably start it up and it'll go, no, sorry, not inside the EU anymore.
Exactly. You had a US-based device. It's not going to work here.
Yes.
So yes, and if you do have more feedback, please let us know at podcast@gearforgesoftware.com, or we're always on Twitter, so it's at Gearforge IoT.
All right, fantastic. And now, before we dig into GDPR, we should get a word from our sponsor.
Yes, so Gearforge Software is an IoT consultant that works with mid-sized companies that are ready to dip their toes into the connected world. If you don't know where to turn when figuring out your IoT strategy, give Gearforge Software a call and have a discussion. You can learn more at gearforgesoftware.com. And I don't think it's going to work if you're in the EU.
Well, if you send us an email, you'll be just fine.
Yes. I don't think the website is going to work.
No.
I believe we can still send those.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Still. Yes.
If you agree to receive them.
As long as you have explicitly opted in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
no opt-outs. Only explicit opt-ins. Right. And this really is the topic of our conversation today is GDPR. And, we're going to do things a little differently on this episode. Normally when we do a news episode, we take a few articles and we kind of discuss those in a little bit more detail. But today, there's just so much and it's all interesting. what we've decided to do is take a little higher level look and try to focus more on the discussion around some topics that are sort of interesting with GDPR and what's specifically going on right now, and less maybe on the particulars of a particular news article. So a little bit more discussion, a little bit less news, I guess. But if you are interested in, we've got just a whole bunch of articles that we found. They will be in the show notes, assuming you can get to them. So let's talk just really briefly about what GDPR is, in case any of our listeners really haven't heard of it before. So how would you describe this? If you're going to put it in a nutshell, Florian, what would you say?
I would think it's active. Well, the idea of consent has been there before, but I think what has changed is basically, first of all, that this is a EU law which doesn't only affect EU citizens, in that it also applies to other countries outside the EU. So you have to guarantee compliance even in the United States, for example. And the other difference is, I think, is the active compliance. So guaranteeing that the user understood the conditions under which he used the product, gave consent to a newsletter or whatever it may be, and giving the option of opting out of it, which, and I think we'll get to that later, many companies still are not doing, although they are rolling out new versions of their products.
Yeah, so, I think that's right on. And just also, so GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, is, as Florian mentioned, it's a EU regulation. It literally became active as of this morning, as we're recording this on May 5th, 2018. It's been passed for a couple of years. That was sort of the time period for preparing to implement. And it is intended, I think, as a set of protections to try to rein in the data practices of various, I guess I've taken it to apply to internet companies, but does it apply to all companies?
As far as I understood, it does not only apply to internet companies.
Yeah,
really?
So anybody
obviously that's
data,
the biggest chunk of it, but I think it's generally concerned with data. And I already saw a couple of letters in the mail by non-internet companies trying to get consent via mail. So I would think either they didn't understand something, or it's general data collection.
Yeah, so general data collection is
right.
So one of the things I was curious about, and maybe you can help with this, Florian, is what about from like an internal business standpoint, right? If you work for a company and they, as part of their IoT process, they collect data on you, is that part of that personal data, or is that considered business data that's personal? Or because that's the piece I'm kind of curious about.
So for example, if you're a user, you're at work and you're using a device that has been purchased by your company, and that device is basically, you are an identifiable entity to that, to the system the device talks to. What is the responsibility of that data?
I don't know whether there is such a distinction between business person and private person within the GDPR. I haven't read about that specifically.
It's just person.
I think it's just the legal person.
Yeah.
And by that, the natural or legal person. So it applies to the person as soon as you use the device in that case. I would think, I'm not sure, but that's how I understood it.
Yeah, and that's really, very interesting. So then,
that's super interesting, because that's the scope and reach is much farther than you might think.
Absolutely.
Right. So if I were an individual employee at a company and the company is using software that is keeping track of data on me, I could request that data to be expunged, basically. under the GDPR, as I understand it. Not a lawyer. Don't pretend to be one.
We should mention that I'm not a lawyer either.
Yes, but you do live in the EU.
Yeah,
That's right.
Which I think qualifies.
And I think that helps a lot.
If that qualifies me, yes, I
Yes.
do live inside the EU.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a bigger. I mean, it's the personal side. I think that's really, really prevalent right now. But it's the business side that I'm really curious about, because there's so much information that's collected internally on your internal systems.
Yeah, and I think the part that's not so clear right now either, which kind of is part of the same problem, is some of the claims by the GDPR are that the data format in which you have to be able to get to your information need to be clear in the sense that you can transfer them into any other system.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So what does that mean?
Not only, yeah, right, and nobody thought about that up so far, I think. So let's say you're using some sort of database or something like that, and you have to get your information out of that database. Then this, the file format, as far as I understand it, has to be a file format that allows an import into another database, or same with software and so on and so forth.
That is just insane.
It's just mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is, because unless they came up with a standard to follow, I don't know how you're going to do that.
Yeah, but I don't know how many standards you would have to come up with.
Oh, it's just I don't know. It's just the scope is just massive. I mean, that's why you have data mapping type scenarios when you're trying to move one system to the next.
It's fairly easy for websites, I think. I mean, I did it on my own websites and it was a pain, but when you're just taking into consideration easy text collection, emails, names, and so forth, that's fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
But I think the point which the GDPR doesn't cover in explicit notes so far is, and that's what some of the articles also touched on, is that the data we are sharing on those sites is consciously shared. And especially when you take a look at IoT, that's inferred or derived data.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's one of the sort of stumbling blocks for IoT in this whole GDPR thing, isn't it? This affects IoT as well as it affects, let's say a website, in that many times these IoT devices are collecting data about their users, and it becomes, I think, more challenging than even on the web, right? Web has its own set of challenges, but when you're talking about these discrete devices in the field, how do you get, for example, some of the questions that came out of one of the articles, Florian, that you found was, what is the data the device collects? How is that data processed and stored? Is it used for profiling? What happens to data from underage kids living in a smartly connected household? Because one of the clauses is, protections for data for children under the age of 13.
Right.
And also, how do you give consent to the use of your data and opt in on these devices? Some of them maybe have screens, but many of them don't.
Yeah.
What does this mean, and what does it mean for IoT manufacturers who already have these devices in the field?
Yeah, I especially love this quote in the one piece. I think it was by Aman Brar, wink once for no, wink twice for yes.
That's great.
I think that kind of expresses the whole problem. You don't have a graphical user interface. Data processing is done in the cloud.
Yep.
There's so many loose ends on this that it really doesn't cover all of the cases. I think there was also this example of a video doorbell, and then you have the problem of giving consent when you use the doorbell. So in different cases, you're allowed to take video of the people outside of your house. In other cases, you're not. So there's just within this case, there's a whole range of different problems resulting from the relatively or comparatively simple claims which the GDPR stated so far.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a lot of these devices, they're inherent to tracking. I mean, that's what they do, right? That's
Right.
part of what they do. So something I was wondering is like, all right, so you get the device. Let's say you go out and you buy the device, you bring it home, you go through the process, and you're like, I'm not okay with this doing it a tracking. Now what? Does the company have to take the item back? I mean, what if you damage it on your way back to return it because you're not comfortable with that? Are they still required to take it back?
Well,
Oh,
it
I
is,
didn't think
yeah,
of
it is a
that.
little funny in that basically it doesn't, GDPR doesn't actually change anything about what they're tracking.
No, no,
It
no, no.
changes how they have to declare it to the user.
Exactly.
There's an explicit versus an implicit opt-in, right? But you know, basically it's like if you want to use Alexa, you have to agree that
You have
you're
Right.
to. It's not going to work without it.
it's no, it's useless without it.
Yep.
So it doesn't actually stop. It sort of brings that maybe more upfront, right?
And I think
Um,
that goes back to your question too, Matthew, with kids. I mean, it should be able to, it can recognize whether the different voices in the household, right?
Maybe, yeah,
Um, so
And I,
so again,
yeah,
that comes back to those differences in the household. It's a household device. How does that work for each person that comes in?
yeah,
And if
yeah.
they're listening, always in the background, which we've talked about before. Now I have guests coming into my house, and can it identify them?
Well, and so here's my question: is so I think your point on that is interesting. It's like it doesn't actually change what's happening, but
Correct.
it does give the user more knowledge up front, and also it gives the user more control of what's done with their data and the ability to get rid of it if they want to, right?
It almost
But
in my head would be nice if so so yesterday I bought a lock, right? And on the lock it said this is a class 3 secure device. And I looked on the back and it said, well, class 1 is this, class 2 is this, class 3 is this. It'd almost be nice if you have that on these type of devices, say, hey, this is a class blah type of
mm,
monitoring device, and then you know the level or how much it actually tracks.
sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Well, what I was thinking about was what about the devices that are already deployed? So it's one thing to have a website, which you can update easily, but what do you do with like there's all these companies that have deployed these IoT solutions.
which are already
And
shipped.
yeah, is there
Yeah.
and is there any? I can't imagine that there's any kind of um, consideration for that in GDPR, because certainly websites are not being allowed to be grandfathered in. You know, if your
Right.
site
Yep.
was created
I,
before
I
X.
didn't see any option for that,
Yeah.
and or any ideas about that. And another point, which is sort of in the same range, is you mentioned those different types of locks, um, and I think what it comes down to ultimately, at least for the moment, is that the different kinds of security that you're getting are also an economic question
Mm-hmm.
because um, so far, if you do have smart devices within your household, then usually the cheap ones, which you get, I don't know, in many cases from the Asian market, although I don't want to generalize there,
Mm-hmm.
uh, are sort of less secure,
Yep.
be
Yep.
it because of data quality or be it because of network settings, you don't have high quality networks and so forth.
Right. Well,
Uh,
many times because they are cheap products, actually.
right.
Right.
You don't
That's
you can't even change the generated passwords or the passwords which are set within the factory and so forth.
right.
So first of all, what do you do with those devices which are already shipped?
I
And
would
second of
increase
all,
my business insurance to make sure I have at least 20 million euros available. That's the first thing I would
that's
be.
the
Yeah.
plan.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I think
that's what I would do is I'd call up my insurance, be like, hey, do I have 20 million euros worth of insurance?
I think insurance companies are going to go through the roof now
oh
that you
yeah,
said that.
so true. Yeah, and I think this is actually a good time for us to kind of move on to legal a little bit. So the first lawsuits have already been filed, you guys.
What?
Yeah,
Today?
so yeah, I
Crazy.
saw it this morning. So
They
Max
were just
Schrems,
waiting.
yeah, just waiting until it went. So the first GDPR lawsuits filed seeking 10.6 billion euros, 3.9 billion sought against Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, and another 3.7 billion filed in complaint against Google Android. And sort
Wow.
of the nutshell here is that this privacy campaigner Max Schrems is basically asserting that these companies are coercing users into accepting their data collection policies, and now under the new law. And so it's very interesting. I'll be curious to see how that shakes out, but it didn't take long, did it?
No,
No,
not really.
day of, and we've got lawsuits already.
There
Wow.
has been quite a bit of commentary in the US about this being sort of a shakedown
Yeah.
effort of big companies. And it's hard to argue with that, seeing something like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And,
Um,
and I'll bring this up now, Matthew. I don't know if this is the right spot or not, but I really struggle, and maybe this is a legal piece or something, and Florian, maybe you can jump in here.
Hmm.
I really struggle with the fact that I feel like there was no separation between, let's say, a small business and a large company.
mhm.
Yeah.
And unless I missed something within the GDPR regulations, but I didn't see anything. It's like, all right, if you've got under 50 employees or something like that, right? Or
Yeah.
less than 100 employees, because what does a mom and pop do?
Yeah. I talked about that with a friend of mine who also runs a website, and he was really getting frustrated and working on his website night and day because, as in my case, it's a one-man show,
Yeah.
and there's many of those people out there, who blog for fun or try to make a couple bucks, or in that case euros on the side,
Hmm.
and they have to guarantee this or obey to the same rules as, say, I don't know, General Motors does.
Yeah.
So and they have a whole team of programmers just running through the steps and probably just waiting to fire the stuff up on their website, and
Yep.
they're done. And for many others, that's work for, let's say, a couple of weeks, depending what you have to do.
Well, and I wonder, and Matthew, maybe maybe they can't even do it.
Well, there are some cases that I've read about, but I'll just take, our particular example. When you look at from the legal standpoint, the risk of violation is so high, right? Even if you do everything right, there's still that risk out there, and
Yeah.
it is easier it is actually not easier. It's less risky to just block the EU
It
if
is.
you don't
It is.
actually have to do business with it. Like we're not targeting European Union users. We don't plan to do business in the EU. There's really no reason for us to keep the site, live in the EU, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like this has some serious side effects, and we've been seeing that. We'll talk about that in the next section a little bit of, the internet's going dark a little bit in places because of exactly this. And I saw, in any case, I just wanted to bring it up in the legal section here because I think it is a risk assessment strategy, right?
Mhm.
That there's
Absolutely.
a huge legal risk of non-compliance. And Florian, to your point, you're talking about sort of the one-man show, but there
Yeah.
are lots and lots of companies, startups all over the world that are less than 10-person
Yeah.
operation.
Yeah.
And this is a huge problem, especially, if you're running a website and you're collecting contact form info, for example, maybe not so much, right? It's work, but it's okay.
Right. Right.
But what if you're running 1,000 websites?
Yeah.
What if you are running one website, but it does a lot of data collection? And it's like now, I could see that being a big problem. And we've actually seen some cases. So recently, Clout announced they're actually going to shut down, and they cited GDPR as their reason. It sounds like they were sunsetting that service anyway. There's a social media somewhere in Eastern Europe that has decided to shut down because it wasn't worth, paying the developers to make all the changes necessary. And other cases, right, of companies that are just kind of forced out because it's doesn't make business sense to comply, or who've decided just not to do business in the EU. Now, that being said, if you're Google, this is a huge problem for Google, but they also have a huge amount of resources.
Right.
But to Cliff's point, I really feel like for a small business, the burden is especially high here.
Yeah, and based off the Eurostat, they define a SME, which is a small to medium-sized enterprise, as having less than 250 persons, and then a small enterprise, so your small shops, less than 50 folks. So that's kind of your definitions.
And I think another point that adds to that is not only is it the extra work you have to put in regarding how many persons you do have in the company, but you also have to do the work for every individual data point. So you have to give a reason. Why am I collecting, say, the customer's name for this and that reason? Why are you collecting the email for this reason? Why are you collecting? So you can't just do it in one block, so to say, just give one explanation. But as far as I saw it, even for websites, it's just a huge chunk of text with each and every section starting the same way, basically. Yeah. I am collecting this and that kind of data for this and that reason.
Really?
And this, I think, will, from a website's point of view, my first thought was, the first websites I thought which implemented this did a really great job content-wise and a really bad one design-wise, obviously.
Yes.
Because they just wanted to get it out there. And I think that's what you're going to see over the next couple of weeks. It's just going to be people trying to catch up, and it's just the content which is out there, and people are going to be either frustrated because they're getting so many, or in some cases even irritated because it doesn't look like it should be on the website. It's not, a finished product like the rest of the website. So in many cases, you do have those, this one web page which looks like it was designed in 1990, and it has all of the right sections within it, but I wouldn't trust a website like that, and let alone type in my information into that.
Right. Well, and I did make a note for a comment later on that this is going to contribute once again to sort of the worsening of the user experience on the web.
Absolutely.
It seems like I got very annoyed after the cookie law was passed. I don't remember when that was, but again, in the EU 5 years ago or something. And all of a sudden, all of the websites started coming up with this site uses cookies, which is the silliest thing I've ever seen in my life.
They're doing that again now because.
Yeah, I know. But now it's worse because instead of that, you get a whole dialogue that pops up that, it's like, I'm just browsing. I really don't care.
Yes, exactly.
The user experience is terrible, and it's worse on mobile, which, again, I feel the practicality of this is there's some things that were missed. So you can tell I'm a fan. Here's the thing. I definitely am a fan of enhancing privacy for users. I think there is something that needs to be done to sort of make large businesses more responsible with their data. But I worry that what happened with GDPR is it's going to have just a tremendous number of ripple effects. And I'm not sure that it's actually super effective in doing what they ultimately wanted it to do.
Yeah.
It seems like a great way for the governments of Europe to get some teeth into the big tech companies, though. Is what it looks like to me.
I'm not sure about getting teeth into the tech companies, but I would certainly agree with the rest. I mean, there is, this strong sense that there needs to be some sort of regulation, and I think this is even stronger inside Europe than inside the US. You guys, for example, you talked about the Google I/O last time about the assistant.
Yeah.
Getting an appointment for a haircut or something like that. This was just mayhem when this hit the German journalism field. Because to a German or European, I guess, ear, this is just, totally crazy and a violation of privacy, which I can understand. I mean, I look at those features and I think they're awesome, but I can understand that some people are in fact freaked out by that.
Sure.
And I would also say that we do need clear instructions and clear sense of what we are passing on. But there are just too many points which the GDPR, as I understand it so far, just misses, like unintentional data sharing, when you let's say you're just sharing your location or the device you're using or whatever. What about high quality or low quality networks? What about older IoT devices? Do you have to send them back to guarantee compliance? What do you do if you don't have a graphic user interface? All those technical points are just not in there, obviously, because it's a legal document. And I think so far there need to be a lot of additions to that for it to make sense to the tech industry to actually comply.
Well, one of the things I've seen in here, Florian, that I found interesting when I was reading through, there's a lot of information. I mean, this thing is just massive, but in their kind of the FAQ that I found that helped, it mentioned the fact that, well, if I collect information manually, do I need to comply? Because I think you'd said, hey, my trash guy sent me a letter, right?
Yeah.
In the FAQs, it stated, hey, if this gets turned into some sort of structured, let's say a database, let's say you take that information that you're manually collecting and put it into a structured database, then yes, you have to comply. Yep.
Right.
So, and I was like, golly, that is just across the board, everywhere.
Yeah,
that's just huge. Yeah.
Hey guys, so I want to move forward.
Sure.
Let's keep this rolling, and our next topic is going dark. So I think this was sort of an interesting thing.
Is this the dark web, Matthew?
Not the dark web, but basically
not yet.
I think it's interesting because what we were talking about a little bit earlier, it seemed is happening, and maybe more than I expected it to be, which is that this morning there were a number of sites that basically started blocking traffic from the EU, including news sites.
Yep.
And this particular headline says dozens of US news websites are temporarily unavailable across the EU as the GDPR takes effect today. And this includes the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times. Now it says temporarily, so presumably they will eventually become available. They must not have been quite ready. But I do think it's very interesting. And as I mentioned before, as a risk management strategy, depending on your particular business, going dark might be the safest way to go.
Yeah.
Safe but sad.
Safe but sad. I think sad for the for residents of the EU, and sad for
totally. And I mean, not only for residents of the EU, but especially if you think about this being a news website.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just put myself into the shoes of a journalist, let's say of the Chicago Tribune, I would think I want my words out there, and not only outside of the EU, And I think this is what qualifies good journalism, and it doesn't seem like it's an intentional consequence of the GDPR, and maybe this will just be, this will pass and this will be an intermediary consequence which will go away after a couple of weeks. But this really got me worried.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does seem like there's a possibility. Again, when we talk about startups, so I guarantee you, Florian, if I were going to start a software startup today, when we first roll out our product, we would not target the EU. We would target probably the US, North America.
US only.
Yeah, just for legal reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I know it's not about me.
Yeah, but I do worry about that kind of unintended consequence. And
yeah, totally.
what does that mean for startups in the EU? Like, is there a ripple effect there? I just wonder. I don't know. It's speculation. Maybe it won't be that bad. We'll get our arms around it, but it's a risk that wasn't there yesterday.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, this will probably pile on with tax laws and a couple of other points, which will just, I fear, I don't know, but I would think will make Europe to some companies less attractive.
Oh, of course, that's guaranteed.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because I mean, if you think about it, Florian, from a pure business standpoint, and
it's not worth it.
Yeah, I would weigh it. Like, all right, it's going to cost me, I don't know, $15 million to comply, and on top of that, the risk of 20 million euros. Plus, it also states in there that you can have personal lawsuits from individuals on top of that.
Yeah.
So the financial risk beyond kind of just the internal cost, I'd be like, all right, so we're at $100 million risk here or cost, but we're only talking, we're going to make $20 million in profits. It's not worth it.
Well, like you've downplayed it, because 20 million is 10 or 20 million, depending on what you've violated.
Oh, sorry.
Is the minimum.
The minimum. It's 4% of your global revenues.
3 to 4% of your global revenues, which for some companies might be far more than that.
Oh, yeah.
You're just getting started.
Yeah. So,
but here's the flip side. If you're a small company, 10 to 20 million euros is bankruptcy.
That's it.
Oh, guaranteed.
So it's very scary. It's very scary to me.
Extremely scary.
Yeah. And I think, it's not really a point that every firm has to target the EU, but how can you not take this into consideration when you're just starting one? And I think the next thing is, not all of those lawsuits which we've seen, like the one you mentioned earlier, we don't know yet how those play out.
Absolutely.
What are the control instances? How long does it take until there is a decision? Will each and every one of those people really have to pay X amount of money, or will they just say, well, okay, that was just a small blogger, and he didn't have this or this kind of information on his website. That's fine. He did it now. That's okay. I'm really curious how this plays out in the small and in the larger cases, and what we are going to see over the next couple of months to really get an impression of that.
I think you make a great point, Florian, and I want to just add a counterpoint here, which is in the US, which is notoriously litigious. People are suing each other constantly for all sorts of reasons.
It's like a hobby for you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it really is, and it's a good country to be a lawyer. But one of the things that happens here is people will essentially, it's not a frivolous lawsuit, right? But it is unlikely that they will persevere and ultimately succeed in winning some kind of court case. But that the lawsuit alone, the cost of the lawsuit alone, can be enough, right?
Sure.
And so it acts as a dampening effect on innovation and other things to know that you get sued. And now there's just this more surface area exposed, basically, where people can go after you.
Yeah.
And in a way, I sort of feel like this lawsuit news, I don't know how that's going to play out. That might all get kicked out of court. But at the very least, it's already had an effect just by the fact that the lawsuit was filed. Because now those companies, no matter their size, they still have to go through the process of,
Right.
their legal teams are working on this that wasn't there yesterday. And so, good, bad, or otherwise, I think there's an effect. So in the case of that individual blogger, if it were to happen, that is catastrophic, because how do you hire an attorney? And it's not worth it. I would think I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, I would just shut down.
Yeah, just leave it as is.
Yeah, like, I'm out.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like I said, we'll have to see. And I think the obvious ones which people are or seem to be going after first are obviously the big guys like Facebook and Google and so forth. But like I said, I'm really curious what's going to happen to the smaller cases, when they find, let's say, a small business owner who's running a website just to collect some data for his business, or even if it starts to go across the pond. I don't know how exactly they are going to implement this. I mean, it states what's going to happen, but not how it is going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have an understanding of how they are going to run this.
One thing to note too, guys, is just because you go dark doesn't mean you're compliant. Here's why. If you have data, you have to still provide a way for those that possibly had their data collected on your site, a way to request for it to be deleted. I mean, or
for 6 years, I think.
Yeah. So you still have to. So even if you go dark, right?
You still have obligations.
You still have obligations underneath the GDPR. So it's like they still have to have some mechanism to be able to get to that information or ask that it be deleted.
Yeah.
Interesting to see how this all shakes out.
Oh, Cliff, we're going to be talking about this for months.
Oh, absolutely. I just wanted to mention, you pulled up some interesting screenshots this morning from one of the news organizations, and they now have a basic and an EU subscription. So what's going on there?
Well, it looks like what's happening is because, I mean, if you think about most news organizations, they're ad supported, right? Mm-hmm. And it's only getting worse. Or there's I've seen lately a lot of surveys and things like that. You take the survey, you can read the article.
Yeah, it's ad supported if it's free. Otherwise, it's some kind of paywall usually.
Precisely. And it looks like because of the GDPR, it's allowing news organizations to roll out an EU-based subscription, which is typically a lot more than even their normal subscription. Some of them that I'm seeing are 50% to 100% more.
Yeah, so this is basic subscription to the WashingtonPost.com is $60 a year. Premium EU subscription is $90 a year.
Yep.
It offers no on-site advertising or third-party ad tracking. So basically, they've cut out their ad revenue and just replaced it with a straight-up fee.
Exactly.
But if I already do have a subscription, it doesn't, I mean, if I am an EU citizen and I do have one, it doesn't automatically turn into a premium EU subscription, does it?
I don't know.
That's a great question, Florian.
Yeah.
I'm just worried about my subscriptions now that I'm receiving.
Yours are going up.
Maybe at the next
I might be bankrupt tomorrow.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. Another kind of unintended side effect, I think, here is it's just easier not to. We were talking about YouTube, Florian. So we often embed YouTube videos on websites because it's kind of a nice way. It's better to embed the YouTube video actually than to just put a video directly on the website, because YouTube sort of has a social effect, right? And the more views you get, the more your video ranks, and it's just generally a good platform for that.
Yeah.
But because they do tracking, and they're even with the even with the no cookie option, basically if a user plays the video, they do add cookies and track some data. So it's not fully GDPR compliant. You'd have to make it compliant with behavior on your website. And so, again, there was a sort of recommendation to pull your embedded YouTube videos, right? Because it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
It's not worth the changes necessary just to be able to embed a video.
Yeah, and I think the result of that for many months to come will just be frustrated users who don't really understand what GDPR even means or what it stands for, and they just want the video and don't understand what's going on. And of course, there has to be some trickle down effect. I mean, I get that. You have to have the legislation first, and then technical implementation of that has to follow. But like I said before, I think there are just too many loose ends to this, like video, like databases, different kinds of tracking and so forth, which haven't been considered yet.
Oh, it's across the board. There's going to be quite the shakedown and shake up yet to come. Yep, you're entirely right.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, so I think we've actually probably touched on all of these categories now, but in particular, we talked a little bit about small businesses. That it seems the weight of GDPR is especially on the shoulders of small businesses. And, I think larger businesses are also susceptible to this. We mentioned some earlier that had decided to shutter or as I mentioned, go dark in Europe because of this. Verve they actually just opened European operations a couple of years ago. They have cited GDPR as their reason for leaving. It's just not worth it for them.
Yep.
And, most of these things, if you're making good money in Europe, you're going to find a way to be compliant. But it is definitely having an effect. And I think generally there are lots of little unintended consequences that seem to be cropping up. And I wanted to mention one that I saw on Twitter, which is this user has the Twitter handle password storage, and apparently he set the age at less than 15 when creating the account, and now he says he has to send a government-issued ID to unblock, or as an account owner, I have to get my parents' agreement.
That is the funniest thing ever.
Isn't it funny? Yeah. So again, that's a silly example, but sort of unintended consequence there. So
that is so funny. Oh my gosh.
So did you guys have anything else you wanted to bring up related to GDPR? It's such a huge topic. We could probably go on.
It's just massive.
So huge. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's been in my inbox all week, basically. I think I still have like 120 unread emails, and I just had to read the subject line to know what it's about. So I'll just work through that. And that's also a consequence which I think many people didn't think about, that it's just frustrating for many users, because now they kind of have to work through all of their accounts and all of their websites and newsletters and databases, and I don't know what else is there. And like I said, many don't even understand why.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Florian, is this something that are people talking about this? Like casual people, not obviously technical people.
Well, you go to the coffee shop, right? Is this of topic?
Yeah. I just had a chat with somebody who is leading an interview for a documentary, and we had a chat afterwards. It's a colleague of mine, and he said he was interviewing I don't know, a 60-year-old person, so not really technical, not really into social media or anything like that. And they, like I said, they wanted to turn this into a documentary afterwards. And this person said, but if we turn this into the documentary, don't we have to make sure that it's compliant with this new law that's coming out on the 25th?
Oh my gosh.
And, you just realize that many people have heard about this who just know it's something about personal data.
Mm-hmm.
and we don't really know what it's about. And I guess that's also because a lot of the terminology is very broad, and it is in many cases obviously supposed to apply to as many cases as possible. That's like, let's say, taxes and your tax files. But in many cases, it just stirs up confusion. So yeah, people are talking about it, not really in the sense that you hear, today's the day, not
Right.
like on Twitter, but you do hear this, and in some cases, I'm sure you will get the same which we had with the Verpixelungsrecht, the right to be pixeled when Google was driving around for Street View. And people were very confused about what this right entailed and what it was about, because everybody thought I'm going to be photographed now, although in many cases they weren't really in the area which was relevant. And trying to get to a lawyer and trying to take all kinds of steps which weren't even necessary. Right. So there's, with general folks, I think there's a lot of confusion. And in that regard, I think Germany is a bit different because, personal data is a big thing, just obviously because of Germany's history.
Mm-hmm.
But in many cases, when it comes to things like that and they hit the news, then it's just a general concern and a bit of misunderstanding, I think. And it might take some time. And I think some of the points which I've read and seen so far are pretty good. I mean, I agree with a lot of the statements. It's not that I would say GDPR is bad in general. And actually, I'm glad that some websites ping me now, noting me that they still have my data, when I thought, I don't really remember registering there. But in some cases, it's not as ironed out as I would have hoped for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it will be interesting to watch how it develops. I generally am in agreement with you. I think data protection for users is important, and I worry that GDPR in its implementation is just going to cause more pain than good. But we'll see. These things take time, and they do have a tendency to shake out, and everybody freaks out for a while, and then it's okay. So, so we'll see.
And I would be
just hope for the best.
And I would be really curious if any of our listeners have thoughts or have stories that they'd like to share about how GDPR is impacting them. Hit us up on Twitter. I mean, Gearforge, IoT, or podcast at gearforgesoftware.com. We'd love to share some of those stories that come out from this. I'd really be curious.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any GDPR related stories or informations or anecdotes, we'd love to hear them, and we'll talk about them on the next podcast.
Yep.
So that just about wraps things up for this week's very exciting special GDPR episode.
Special edition.
That's right. Cliff, do you have anything fun planned for the weekend?
Well, we spoke GDPR, but there's a bigger deal out there than GDPR today.
Oh, what's that?
Solo, Star Wars. Come on, is there anything bigger than that? I mean, I realize it's GDPR, but come on, Solo. Anything Star Wars like trumps everything. That's
absolutely.
So so tonight it is.
Do you have to give like explicit consent to get into the theater, or?
That's a great question. The explicit is going and telling folks, don't talk to me about this until after I've seen the movie.
Yes.
My son went and seen it. Yeah, he's seen it last night. I said, I don't want to know what you think.
Oh, he loves to spoil, huh?
Yeah, I don't want to know anything, because he called me as he was sitting in the theater saying, Dad, I'm sitting in the theater getting ready to watch Solo. And I was like, oh, you suck. So he's on blackout right now. I can't talk to him until after, and then once I see it, I can't talk to Matthew. So Matthew, we won't be able to talk again until after you've seen the movie.
All right. Well,
and
we'll see what I can do.
We've got that tonight, and then we've got to get her. It's Memorial Day, so up here in Minnesota, we don't plant our gardens till Memorial Day and after. It's just kind of that typical thing. So we're going to plant the garden. And garden for us is actual garden. It's tomatoes, things like that. It's not the grass. And then you may see me floating downriver trying to figure out a boat motor. So
floating miles downriver.
Yes. So if you see someone floating downriver cussing at a motor, that would be me. Feel free to bring out help, and tow ropes, and probably a beer, because I will need all those. And Heather will be in the front with a nice, beautiful hat on and looking amazing.
Very good.
Probably laughing.
Yes, laughing at you, making fun.
Florian,
Hopefully tweeting the whole experience.
Exactly.
So, Florian, what about you?
Well, it's not Memorial Day, but still the garden. So first we're going to go out and shovel some more dirt. And that's basically the whole rest of the Friday and the Saturday.
That's a lot of dirt, Florian.
Oh, yeah.
You'll have to give us a picture of the dirt. You're talking like needing a bigger machine. I'm like,
oh, I do, but we don't have it yet. And when we get it, we don't know how to get it onto the property. So that's a problem up until now. There's just...
can you hire like a fleet of drones to fly it to the back?
I was thinking about that, but they didn't give me consent, so I have to say no to that.
You have to get us a picture of this garden. I'm really curious.
Shovel drones are not an option in Germany.
You have to wink twice.
Yes, wink twice to get the
wink twice for shoveling. No, that's first, but I do have the motivation at the end of the tunnel, which is our first big barbecue of the year.
Oh gosh.
Last couple of weeks have been kind of mixed weather-wise. It was a bit dewy, sometimes raining, and a lot of thunder. So now we're finally getting the beast out of the garage and firing up the barbecue and having some spare ribs and some friends over. So yeah, that's gonna be the weekend.
Well, hopefully you're not eating the friends and you're eating the spare ribs.
Yes.
Well, I'm still thinking about that, but I think they're safe.
Good. Give them like, you can eat if you shovel. Here's a shovel.
Oh yeah, I didn't
like,
think of that.
If you want to eat, it costs at least 5 shovels.
Yeah, that's the idea.
That is actually
shovel and have the barbecue afterwards.
Yeah,
yes, that is a brilliant idea.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh. Yeah. Matthew, how about you?
How about you, Matthew?
Well, yeah, I will do my best to get to see Solo this weekend. Of course, I want to. I'm just not sure how the weekend is going to shape up yet. But it is my son's 12th birthday, and so that might be kind of a fun thing to go see.
Yeah.
With him. Yeah. So we'll see. But here's to hoping.
And will you guys have a party after that, or?
I think we have a party planned for him after his birthday for sort of sleepover thing for his friends. So, yeah.
So you could just turn it into a solo party.
That's right. We could.
Yes.
Well, folks, that pretty much wraps things up. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's show. And Florian, I want to say a special thank you to you for joining us all the way from Europe today. That was great.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome, you guys.
So until we speak again, so long and be well. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.